Well, hello, friends, and welcome back, as I always say. It's been a week since our last episode, and we have another interesting episode today of the show English Time with Kyle Millar. And I've decided lately to do thematic shows, so I try to base the whole show around a topic. Now, I'm not saying that it'll be this way forever. It might change. But today, I want to welcome you to the wonderful world of bees. Las abejas. That's right, bees. Which, of course, are some of the smallest creatures on Earth, but play a very big role in keeping our planet alive. Now, in this podcast, we're going to look at the lives of bees, how they build these complex colonies inside the hives, colmenas, hives, to the way they communicate through movement and also scent, why their work as pollinators is essential for so much of the food we eat as well. And we'll also look at their close relatives like bumblebees, wasps, avispas, and hornets. I think you say avispones. Avispones. And we'll talk a little bit about what makes each of those unique. In fact, it's something that I had to research myself because I wasn't sure of the difference between a wasp and a hornet, but we're going to get into that. And it isn't just about biology, it's about connection. Bees are deeply linked to ecosystems, to agriculture, and even human culture. From ancient beekeeping to modern environmental challenges. Here we're going to talk about bees and kind of uncover who they are, what they do, and the role that they play. So let's get into it, learning a little bit about bees as I welcome you to the show. So thank you for tuning in and connecting to today's episode of English Time with Kyle Millar. All right. So welcome to our show. Thanks for tuning in. And I want to thank you for listening and also for subscribing. If you subscribe or share this podcast with a friend, it does help me. It certainly does. So we're talking about bees today. And I thought we could talk about, first of all, what a bee is and how they relate to other insects. So all of these insects we're going to talk about now are, they belong to this order. If you get into biology, you talk about orders. And the order is called Hymenoptera. Hymenoptera. I'm probably mispronouncing that. And you have a different pronunciation in Spanish, Hymenopteros. Hymenopteros, I think, if I'm saying that right. I'm probably saying it wrong. But they differ in behavior and diet and body shape, these different insects. So first of all, we have a bee, que es abeja. In Spanish, you say abeja. In English, we say a bee, which is generally a pollinator. It serves to pollinate. And it feeds mostly on nectar. Nectar, you say in Spanish. Very similar. We say nectar. And pollen. In English, we have a double L with that word. You say pollen, we say pollen, but it's double L in English. And bees are usually a bit fuzzy on the outside. Fuzzy. Not furry. No, it's not that they have pelo, like a dog would be furry, but in English we could say they are fuzzy. Fuzzy, like peluda, but with a little bit of almost like a felt-like feeling, fuzzy. And this helps them collect pollen and makes them especially effective at pollinization. Now, most bees are not aggressive unless they're threatened. This is something I always tell my nieces who are now 6 and 4 years old. I tell them, look, these bees aren't going to hurt you. Their goal, or they're not trying to hurt you unless you threaten them or scare them. And many species like honeybees live in these very organized colonies. So a honeybee, I guess you could say abeja mellifera, no? Honeybee. These are the ones that make honey, of course. And they have a very organized colony with a queen, la reina, of course, and workers, obreros, obreras, and drones. So these are the ones where there are many, many, many of them. We have the term drone in the modern world as well, these drones that fly around. In Spanish, I guess for a drone bee, you say a zángano. And they have a stinger as well, a little needle to sting, para picar. It's barbed. It has, like, you say púas. So it has, and there are many different species of bees. And a bee, by the way, will die after it stings, it dies. Okay, so these are basic bees. Now you have the bumblebee, abejorro, which is a large, very fuzzy bee that feeds on nectar and pollen. So compared to other bees, these bumblebees are bigger, they're rounder, and they often appear a little bit slower. You know, they look kind of almost, well, not hovering, but they move a bit slower. You can see them. You could probably catch them or hit them out of the air easier. And they seem to be quite gentle, and they sting less often than people think. On the other hand, we have a wasp. Eso es una avispa. Now, a wasp is quite different from a bee. Wasps are usually slimmer, más delgadas, más lisas también. They're smoother, and they have less hair. Son menos peludas, okay? And many are predators. They're predators or scavengers, we could say. Scavengers, an animal or insect that goes out, searching desperately for food. Carroñeros, you could say. Carroñeros, scavengers. And they feed on other insects, as well as other sweet, sugary substances. Right? And they can be aggressive, of course, more aggressive than bees, especially when they're defending their nests. Now, wasps, I said bees can only sting once, but wasps can sting multiple times because their stingers are not barbed. So they don't get stuck in. So the bee stings and the stinger stays inside the victim and tears off. Whereas the stinger of a wasp goes in and then comes back out, and they can go and sting someone else, right? Now, a hornet is a large wasp. Maybe you say avispón. So it's a large wasp, avispa grande. Hornets tend to be bigger, more robust, and also more defensive of their nests than typical wasps. And they give a very painful sting. I have been stung many times by a hornet, and it's no fun. Now, they have a venom. They do have some venom, veneno, but their sting is more defensive, so it's not going to, well, you could have a reaction to it, of course, but in most cases, you would have maybe a mild reaction, but it would be very painful. It would be painful and uncomfortable, certainly. So bees and bumblebees are mainly pollinators, in summary, whereas wasps and hornets are smoother, smaller. They're more defensive and predatory. They can be defensive, but they can be very aggressive too if you get near them. So I thought it would also be fun to look at some interesting facts about bees, as they are really some of the most remarkable creatures in our natural world, and their lives are surprisingly complex, maybe more complex than people realize. So let's look at a few interesting facts. First of all, they actually communicate. Bees communicate, among other ways, with something called the waggle dance. So when a worker bee finds a source of nectar, it goes back to the hive, la colmena, no? And it performs a certain movement with 8 figures. This 8-figure, like a little dance move. And the angle and the duration of the dance, this is fascinating, tell other bees the direction and the distance of the food source. So this dance is basically like a living map. Now, bees are also responsible for pollinating a huge, like a very, very significant portion of the world's crops, la cosecha, the crops. Apparently, they contribute to about 1/3 of the food we eat, including fruits and vegetables and nuts. So without bees, our diets would be much less diverse. We'll get more into this in a few minutes, talking more about the effects on food, on the food chain. Now, as for honey, a single honeybee produces only a tiny amount of honey in its whole life. They say about 1/12 of a teaspoon, which is about 4 centiliters. But of course, when you have thousands of bees working together, they can create enough honey to sustain an entire colony through the winter. And this is another fascinating fact here. Bees are apparently capable of recognizing human faces. Of course, they have a very small brain. The brain on a bee is about the size of a sesame seed. But they can distinguish patterns. They can remember visual information. And this helps them navigate and interact with their environment. So they can recognize faces and people, apparently, despite their tiny brain. And there's also something called bee highways, which is a network of flower corridors that are planted. So in certain areas, people have intentionally planted flowers in lines that bees will follow to allow bees to safely travel between different areas. So it improves pollination. So you have farmers that want to ensure that bees reach a certain area. Well, they make a line of flowers, and the bees keep finding more, so they keep progressing and going more further and further until they reach certain areas that these farmers typically want them to reach. So they call it a bee highway, carretera de abeja. And this, of course, helps with local biodiversity, especially getting in around urban areas, making sure that bees are able to cross through. And then we have, of course, the idea of the colony, especially with the honeybees. Honeybee colonies are very organized, and the different bees have different roles. The role of the queen, of course, is to lay eggs, and then you have worker bees, los obreros, which gather food, and they build the hive, and they also protect the colony. And drones are there basically just to mate with the queen. So they have this division of labor, and together, by sticking to their role, it's like a good company. If you have good people in good roles who are doing their job, it ensures the survival of the colony. Another interesting fact about bees is that they are very efficient flyers. Their wings beat, so the movements of the wings, they beat around 200 times per second, which can allow them to hover, right, to stay perfectly still. I wouldn't say they can hover perfectly like a hummingbird can hover, colibri. It can hover, which is when it stays in one place, and they can dart quickly, and they can navigate with precision because of the movement, the rapid movement of their wings that allows them to be very agile in the air. And bees are found on every continent except one, except Antarctica. They've adapted to a huge range of climates and environments, right? Tropical forests, cooler farmlands, and even urban gardens. But there are no bees in Antarctica. And bees, of course, help regulate ecosystems, not just food production, but through pollination. They support reproduction of wild plants and help sustain birds, insects, and mammals. So you have plants and crops, but also, animals and other insects that are able to survive because of a healthy bee population. And they say bees have existed on Earth for more than 100 million years. Apparently they co-evolved at the same time as flowering plants and have created one of the most important ecological partnerships, let's say. A partnership between insect and plant. So they're more than just honey producers. They're essential contributors to our natural world. So I mentioned that I wanted to talk a little bit about the role of bees in the food we eat. Bees play a huge role in the production because they're these pollinators. So they move from flower to flower, collecting nectar, and they transfer pollen between plants. So this allows many crops, las cosechas, to reproduce and develop fruits, to develop seeds and vegetables. And without this natural service, a lot of plants would produce far lower yields, rendimientos, muchos menores. And some wouldn't produce at all. So a huge variety of the everyday foods we have now depend on bee pollination. Apples, manzanas, right? Apples, strawberries, cherries. They all rely very heavily on bees, and also vegetables like cucumbers, pumpkins, nuts, almonds, for example, with a flowering tree. These are all very dependent on bee activity. So they estimate that about 1/3 of the food consumed globally is directly or indirectly linked to pollination by bees. So beyond the increased food production, they also contribute to the quality and the diversity of our diets. Right? We're talking about larger, healthier, better crops. And if we lost our bee population, food systems would become less stable, food would be more expensive, and there would be much less variety of food. So that would certainly affect us all. So we can certainly thank bees for their contribution. Yeah, they say about 1/3 of the food we eat depends directly or indirectly on bee pollination. Almond production is 100% pollinated by bees in the commercial sense. So almond farmers, like which is big in Spain, very big in California as well, where they rely on bees. They'll bring in bees and have bees in that area to pollinate. Apple yields, el rendimiento de las manzanas, can increase by up to 90% with effective pollination. Strawberries, as I mentioned, they rely on bees, and they become larger, more uniform when bees pollinate them. So they have a higher market value, strawberries that are naturally pollinated. Now, so one single honeybee produces about, like this tiny amount of honey we talked about, like about 4 centiliters, I think. But a colony of bees together can produce about 30 to 50 kilograms per year. So we're talking about thousands and thousands of bees. And when bees are foraging, when they're out looking for food, for pollen, they can visit up to 5,000 flowers in a single day. And you could have 60,000 bees working together in a colony. 60,000 in one colony. So some incredible facts. But why don't we take a look at some vocabulary about bees? Let's make sure we know all this vocabulary. So we have abeja. We said abeja was a bee. B-E-E. Colmena. We say the beehive. H-I-V-E. Hive. Beehive. Panal. Panal we call honeycomb. Honeycomb. C-O-M-B. Honeycomb. Honeycomb. Pollen. We say pollen. Pollinization. Pollination. Not pollinization, but pollination. Pollination. And then you have the art of beekeeping, right? Apicultura. Beekeeping. Like guardando abejas. Beekeeping. Apicultor. The beekeeper. Aguijón. Aguijón is the stinger. S-T-I-N-G-E-R. Stinger. Stinger. And a drone bee. We talked about these. Zángano. We call it drone. Drone bee. So their job is to basically mate with the queen. La reina, the queen bee. Then you have obrera. Las obreras, o obreros. Worker bees. And they hatch and come out of larva. Larva, same in Spanish. You have larva, nectar. Avispa, we saw that word. Avispa, wasp. Y avispón, hornet. So it's like a big wasp, right? Avispón. Vaya avispón. What a wasp. Yes, abejorro. Bumblebee. Bumblebee, I like that. Bumblebee. Bumblebee. Nice pronunciation word. Bumblebee. To bumble is like to move around in a clumsy way, bumping into things, hitting things. So to bumble, if you think about that, they look very clumsy. Clumsy is when you're not coordinated. So to bumble is like to be clumsy and not coordinated. And they kind of look that way. The bumblebee is sort of bumping into walls and things when it moves around sometimes. It doesn't seem to have the precision of other bees. Swarm, enjambre, swarm. Yes, and we have that verb as well, to be swarmed by bees. So if you have bees that, attack you, but typically if you step on a hive, for example, you could be swarmed. And then finally, we have beeswax, la cera. Beeswax. So as we talk about bees and how wonderful they are and how important they are, we also have to talk about the unfortunate truth, which is that bee populations are suffering in a lot of parts of the world. Now, they're not going to disappear everywhere overnight, del día a la mañana, I think you say. But there have been steady declines in a lot of parts of the world. So what's happening to bees? Scientists are saying that there are a number of threats, amenazas, that are leading to this decline in bee population. First of all, habitat loss. So they're losing their habitat. They're losing places. You have what used to be fields, is like they say in Spain. Eso antes era todo campo. And then now it's urbanización. It's a urban area. So they've lost areas to live. They have fewer places to safely live. Also, pesticides, certain insecticides and chemicals can weaken bees' abilities to navigate, to reproduce. There have been also different diseases and parasites that have spread among honeybees especially. And climate change, of course, means that flowers may bloom earlier or later than the bees are active, so it kind of creates a mismatch, un descuadre, in terms of the availability of food. In large fields, you also have a trend in what they call monoculture farming, where one single crop dominates a field. So there's a lack of diversity and the lack of variety in pollen production and a lack of diversity, which leads to less pollen, I guess, being produced and available for bees to survive on. So the result of all this together, it's not like a global collapse, but a bit of a decline, especially among wild bee species like bumblebees or other types of bees. And this is important, right? This really matters because even bumblebees, while we're not getting honey from them, we rely on them to pollinate. And like I said, about 3/4 of flowering plants and a lot of major crops depend on bees as pollinators. So losing that or having that reduced is a threat to our ability to produce our own food. So they're not on the verge of global extinction, but they are under kind of a sustained stress that is causing problems for bee population. So hopefully we find a way to stop that and ensure that we have healthy bee populations and the ability to pollinate, to keep our food supply up, and to keep, healthy bees contributing to our modern ecosystem. I think this is an interesting topic, and it wouldn't be complete. It wouldn't be complete, friends, without my favorite little challenge. You know I love this challenge. So why don't we get into it? You're going to ask me some questions, and I'm going to give you the answers. But in fact, I'm going to give you the answer first, and then I want you to ask me the question. Let's get into today's interrogative challenge. All right, interrogative challenge. You know how this works. I'm going to give you the answer to the question, and you can ask me the question that I have already answered. Okay. Bees are an insect. What are bees? Hey, what are bees? Oh, they're an insect, or they're insects, you could say. Bees produce honey. What do bees produce? What do bees produce? Oh, yeah, they produce honey. Honey is made in a beehive. Where is honey made? Where is honey made? Bees live in colonies. Where do bees live? Where do bees live? Bees collect nectar from flowers. What do bees collect nectar from? What do bees collect nectar from? Male bees are called drones. What are male bees called? Hey, what are male bees called? They're called drones. Bees communicate using dance. How do bees communicate? We'll do 2 more. Hornets are a type of large wasp. What are hornets? Hey, what are hornets? Bees defend themselves with a stinger. How do bees defend themselves? Yeah, how do bees defend themselves, or what do they use to defend themselves? Yes, a stinger. A stinger. Okay. All right, so there you have it, everybody. A little bit about bees today on the show. Learning all about bees, and hopefully you've learned something. In fact, in researching this, I have as well, about these fascinating creatures that are so small but make huge contributions to our environment, to our ecosystem, and play an important role. All right, we are going to finish there. I want to thank you for listening to the podcast today. It's been a lot of fun. And I'll be back soon with another episode. Again, it helps me a lot if you would subscribe, if you would share with your friends. So I encourage you to do that. I would appreciate if you can like it, subscribe, maybe leave a comment. Si dejas un comentario, también me ayuda mucho on iVoox or on Spotify. It all helps, as it helps me to continue to offer this free program with more episodes to come. More episodes coming soon. Thanks for listening, everybody. My name is Kyle Millar. If you have questions for the show, if you have an idea, something you would like me to discuss on the show, it could be a random topic, it could be a grammar topic, you can always reach me on Instagram or Twitter. I'm Kyle Millar, Millar. Or you can also join my free Facebook group. It's called English with Kyle. And you can also reach me on the English Collective, my own social platform for English learning. I recommend for every English learner, if you're interested in learning English, whether you have other classes or not, I recommend you join theenglishcollective.com. It's a great platform, a great community for English learning, and I give classes there several times a week. And you can join me in those classes. We also have conversation club meetings regularly. It's a lot of fun and a very motivating and results-driven community for English learners. It's called the English Collective. So I can meet you there as well. But thanks for listening, everybody. I'll be back soon with another episode. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.